My mother stood up at the head of a long table in the middle of the dining room I had built with my own 2 hands, and lifted her glass to tell 30 relatives that I had never built anything. She didn't know where she was. That's the part you have to hold on to all the way through this, because everything turns on it. She was 60 years old that night, in a deep blue dress she'd bought for the occasion, her hair done that afternoon. And she tapped the side of her wine glass with one manicured nail until the table went quiet, and the tables around us went quiet too. Because that's what happens in a room like that, when somebody decides to make a speech. She had the whole dining room half listening, and she liked that. I watched her feel it land on her shoulders like a warm coat, all that attention, and she smiled the way she only smiles in public. And she said she wanted to say a few words about her girls. "I am the luckiest mother in this city," she said. "I have 2 beautiful daughters. And look where we are. Look at this place. You cannot even get a table here. Bridget had to call months ago." A little ripple of laughter, proud and soft. She put her hand on my sister's arm. And that is so Bridget. She makes things happen. She built something real out of nothing. That whole brand, all those followers, the partnerships. She is the one who actually went out and made something of herself. I sat way down past the cousins, in the seat you give the daughter, when nobody's quite sure what to do with her. I had a glass of water in front of me that I had not touched. I knew what was coming, the way you know a pan is about to spit before it does, and I folded my hands in my lap, and I waited. My mother turned, finally, to me. The whole room turned with her. "And then there's Marin," she said, and her voice went soft and fond, the cruelest register she has. "My oldest. My sweet, serious girl who never quite settled down. Some people build real lives, sweetheart." She lifted her glass an inch higher. "And some of us just never quite built anything. But we love you anyway." The laughter came easy. 30 relatives, a warm room, a confident woman holding a glass. Of course they laughed. It wasn't even cruel to them. It was just Diane being Diane, teasing the quiet one. My sister Bridget had her phone up, filming the little red dot, because she filmed everything. And she was laughing too, her face lit blue by her own screen. And I said nothing. I sat there, in a chair I'd chosen the wood for, under lights I'd argued with an electrician about for a week, in the restaurant, whose name is over the door because I put it there. And I let my mother tell a room full of people that her daughter had made nothing of her life, and I did not make a sound. She had no idea where she was standing. Before I tell you what my mother didn't know about the room she was standing in, and she had no idea, none of them did, let me ask you one small thing first. If quiet stories like this one find their way to you, take a second to subscribe. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. I read them. It means more than you'd think. Because a night like this doesn't really begin at a birthday dinner. It begins years earlier, in 100 small rooms that only I ever stood in. Let me take you back to the start. My name is Marin. I'm 38 years old. And the restaurant my mother chose to say that in, the one my sister had bragged about for weeks, the impossible reservation. The hardest table in the city? I built it. I should tell you what that means before I tell you the rest, because the whole story stands on it. And I won't have you taking my word for anything you can't check. The restaurant is called Juniper. If you live in this city, you have probably heard the name, or tried to get in and failed. There is no surname anywhere on that building. It isn't Marin's. It isn't my family's name. It's just one quiet word painted on glass. And that one detail is the reason none of them ever connected it to me. They thought I had a little food thing, a hobby that had gotten out of hand. My mother used to call it, to her friends, Marin's restaurant phase, the way you'd talk about a teenager's band. Juniper is mine. I built it from nothing over 11 years, every inch of it, and I run it. And the people who work there would walk through a wall for me. And on the night of my mother's 60th birthday, every single one of them knew exactly who I was and exactly who she was. And not one of them said a word because I asked them not to. So that's the shape of it. They didn't know. I knew. The staff knew. And you know now. Hold all of that in your head while I tell you how a daughter ends up at the far end of a table in her own dining room, being told she never built anything and choosing to stay quiet. I want to be fair about my family because this isn't a story about a monster and a saint. It's worse than that. It's smaller and more ordinary than that. My mother, Diane, is not a villain in any way you could point to from across a room. She is warm. She remembers your birthday. She brings the good casserole when somebody's sick. She is the woman everyone's friends wish was their mother. And for most of my life, I watched people fall in love with the public version of her, and I learned to keep my mouth shut about the private one, because the private one keeps a ledger. The private one decided somewhere very early which of her daughters was the prize and which one was the help. And she has spent 30-odd years making the math come out right. My sister Bridget is 6 years younger than me, and Bridget was always the prize. I don't even blame her for it, most days. You hand a child that much sunlight, and of course she grows toward it. Bridget is charming and quick, and she photographs beautifully. And at some point in her 20s, she turned all of that into what she calls a brand. Lifestyle, she says. Which, as far as I can tell, means she photographs her own life, and other people pay her to stand near their products while she does it. And our parents have funded it, quietly and steadily, the whole way. The ring light, the first apartment in the nice neighborhood, for the backdrops, the trips that were really content. When Bridget's business loses money, it's an investment in her future. When mine made money, it was a phase. I learned the difference between those two things, one small moment at a time, over a lot of years. And I want to walk you through a few of them, because you can't understand why I stayed so quiet at that dinner unless you understand how long I'd been practicing. The first one I really remember, I was 22. I told them I wasn't going to finish the business degree they were paying for because I'd gotten a job in a real kitchen, on the line, and I wanted to cook. My father went quiet. My mother put down her fork and said, "Marin, a real career needs a real degree. Anybody can flip eggs. Anybody can flip eggs." I have thought about that sentence in the dark of 100 mornings, at 4 a.m., scaling fish with my hands cracked from the cold, while the city slept, and I built the thing she said anybody could do. Let me give you the rest of them, the small ones, because the small ones are the whole wound. There was the Christmas I cooked. I was maybe 28, already running a real kitchen by then, and I offered to do the whole family dinner. The goose, the sides, the bread from scratch, a dessert that took me 2 days. I drove it all over in coolers, and I plated every dish in my mother's kitchen so it would come out right. And the table went silent, in the good way. The way a table goes silent when the food is actually that good. And one of my aunts asked where the food was from, and my mother, glowing hostess of the year, said, "Oh, isn't it wonderful?" Bridget found the most marvelous little catering company. Bridget found a catering company. I was standing in the doorway with a dish towel over my shoulder and a burn on my wrist from the oven. And I watched my mother hand my work to my sister like a party favor. And I said nothing. I scraped the plates after. I always scraped the plates. There was the year she forgot to invite me to her own birthday lunch. Genuinely forgot, she said. And maybe that's even true, which is somehow worse. I found out because a cousin posted a photo. When I called her hurt, she laughed it off. "Oh, sweetheart, you're so busy with your little food thing. I assumed you couldn't get away." My little food thing. By then, my little food thing employed 40 people. There was the time Bridget's car got repossessed. She'd stopped making the payments because the money was tied up in a launch. And my mother called me. Not Bridget, me, at 11 at night, and said, "You're so steady, Marin. Could you just help your sister out? Just this once?" You know how she is. And I wired the money because it was easier than the 3 days of phone calls that came if I didn't. I never told Bridget it was me. I think my parents told her it was them. That was the arrangement, unspoken and iron. I paid, they got the credit, and the love flowed downhill to my sister, where everyone had already agreed it belonged. And here is the one that still finds me at odd hours. Here is the one with the object I can't forget. About 4 years ago, before Juniper was famous, when it was just becoming the place people whispered about, my whole family came in for my father's birthday. They had no idea it was mine. Bridget had picked it. This new place, supposedly impossible to get into. I pulled some strings. She hadn't pulled any strings. My host had simply seen our last name on the reservation, recognized the family, and quietly given them the best table in the house. And told no one. Because that's what we do. I wasn't even in the building. I was across town, at one of the other venues. But I'd left standing instructions, the way I always did when family came, without explaining why, beyond take care of them, and put it on my account. So my family ate a $400 dinner that I paid for at my own restaurant and never knew it. And on the way out, my mother apparently told the server, my server, in my dining room, "Tell your owner this was lovely." Though the lamb was a touch overdone for my taste. The lamb was not overdone. I designed that dish. But that's not even the worst of it. The thing I can't shake is the candle. The kitchen sent out a little plated dessert with a candle in it, on the house, the way we do. And my mother took a photo of my father blowing it out, and she posted it. And the caption read, 60 years young and still the king. Thank you, Bridget, for the most magical night. You always know the best places. I have that screenshot. I looked at it for a long time. My candle, my kitchen, my check, my sister's name. Then I closed the laptop and went back to work because there was a Friday service to run. And I told myself the way I always did, that it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as the people I loved were happy. I want to be honest with you. It wasn't only money, and it wasn't only credit. It was the smallness. Every single time, the message underneath was the same, and I'd absorbed it so young I barely heard it anymore. Whatever you are, it isn't impressive. Whatever you've done, it doesn't count. Your sister exists, and you are useful. My father, Roger, never said a cruel word in his life, and that's its own kind of thing. Because he never said a kind one in my defense either. He'd just go quiet. Every time. He'd find something to look at on the far wall while my mother did her arithmetic, and his silence was the floor the whole thing stood on. I used to think his silence meant he disagreed with her and just couldn't say so. It took me a long time to understand that silence isn't a side. Or rather, it is. It's always the side of whoever's already winning. I'm genuinely curious what you would have done by this point. If your family had spent your whole life calling your work a little hobby and handing the credit for it to someone else, would you have stayed this quiet this long? Tell me below. I'd really like to know I'm not the only one. So let me tell you the thing they never saw. Because they never once looked. Let me tell you what I actually built, while they were calling it a phase. I left the stable job at 22, the one with the degree attached, and I started at the bottom of a real kitchen, which is a brutal place to start. I spent 6 years on the line. I burned my arms so many times, the scars just became my arms. I learned the way you learn a language. By being yelled at in it. I worked doubles. I worked holidays. I worked through a breakup and a flu and the funeral week of a chef I'd loved. Because in a kitchen, the service goes out no matter what is happening to you. And that lesson, that the work continues through the worst night of your life, is the single most useful thing I have ever learned. And you'll see why before this story is done. When I was 30, I opened my own place, my first one. I took every dollar I had and a second mortgage on a tiny apartment that wasn't worth much to begin with. And I opened a small restaurant with 12 tables, and I poured myself into it completely. And it failed. I want you to hear that, because people who only see Juniper think it came easy. My first restaurant failed. The neighborhood was wrong. The timing was wrong. I was undercapitalized. And after 14 months, I had to close it. And I sat in the empty dining room the night we shut the doors, with the chairs up on the tables, and I cried like something had died. Because something had. I was 31 years old, broke, in debt, single, and my mother's voice was in my head saying, anybody can flip eggs. And for about a week, I believed her. And then, I didn't. I got up. I took a job running someone else's kitchen to pay down the debt. And I watched how the business worked from the inside this time, the money side. The side that had killed my first place. And I learned it the way I'd learned the line, by being burned. And when I was 34, I tried again. Smarter this time. I found the right room in the right neighborhood. I found 2 investors who believed in the food and signed paperwork that kept it mine, and I opened Juniper. And Juniper worked. Not overnight. Nothing works overnight, no matter what my sister's brand wants you to believe. But it worked. Slowly, and then all at once, the way the good ones do. By the night of my mother's birthday, Juniper had been the hardest reservation in the city for 2 years running. I'd opened 2 more places after it, a wine bar and a small second restaurant, a little 3-venue group, all mine, all profitable. I'd been a semi-finalist for the biggest award in my field, the kind of thing that gets your photo in the national press, which my family did not see because they do not read about food, because food is my little phase. I employed almost 100 people. I had built, brick by actual brick, Exactly the kind of real thing my mother spent her life insisting I would never build. And I had built it so quietly, under a name that wasn't ours, that the woman who raised me could sit down inside it on her 60th birthday and not feel the walls.
It was not inherited. Nobody gave it to me. It was not luck, though I had some.
It was 11 years and 2 mortgages and 1 failure and 10,000 4 a.m. mornings. And here is the thing I understood that night. The reason they'd never let themselves see it. To really see Juniper would have meant admitting they were wrong about me. And being wrong about me would have meant unseating Bridget. The whole family economy, the careful arithmetic of who's the prize and who's the help, only works if I stay small. My success wasn't just unnoticed. It was unwelcome. It was a threat to the story. So they looked away for years from a restaurant I'd signed my whole self into and called it nothing because nothing was what they needed it to be. I want to tell you exactly how I found out about the dinner because the way I found out is the reason I handled it the way I did. It was about 6 weeks before her birthday. I was doing what I do most mornings, which is going through the reservation book for the week ahead. Looking for the names I need to know about. The regulars, the press, the big parties, the people we comp. And there it was, for a Saturday night, a party of 30 under the name Bridget, my sister's name. A 60th birthday, the note said. Long table, the private alcove, the works. I sat there and looked at it for a while. My own restaurant's book in my own office. My mother's 60th birthday party booked into my own dining room by my own sister, who had no idea. Who would brag for 6 weeks about pulling strings to get a table at a place her own sister owned. And I waited to feel angry. I really did. I sat with my coffee and waited for the heat to come up, the way it had on 100 other mornings, reading 1,000 other small cruelties. And it didn't come. What came instead was something I only know how to describe one way, because it only happens in kitchens. When a service goes truly insane, every table ordering at once, a cook walks out, a fridge dies, the dining room full and getting fuller, there's a point, if you're any good, where you stop panicking and you go cold. Cold and clear and very, very calm. Everything slows down. Your hands know what to do. You can see the whole board at once. We call it the calm in the middle of the rush, and it is the most powerful feeling I know, and it is the exact opposite of anger. That's what came up, looking at my sister's name in my book. That cold clarity, right in the eye of the storm. And in that calm, I made a decision. And I made it all at once, fully formed. The way you decide things when you've gone cold. I was not going to do anything. I was not going to call my mother and reveal myself in a blaze of triumph. I was not going to cancel the reservation, or accidentally lose it, or stage some ambush where I burst out of the kitchen at the worst moment. All of that was small, and I was done being small. And more than that, all of that would have made me the one who did something. The one who caused a scene. The one who was bitter and jealous, which is the story they'd have reached for in a heartbeat. No. I was going to attend my mother's birthday dinner as her daughter. I was going to sit where they put me. I was going to let the night be exactly what it was always going to be. And I was going to tell my staff one thing and one thing only. Treat that table like any other guest.
give them our best, and say nothing about me.
Not yet. Let the truth surface on its own, in its own time, if it surfaced at all. And if my mother got through the whole evening without doing the thing she always did, if she somehow, for once, I was just a woman enjoying her birthday, then I would pay for the dinner in silence, the way I always had, and drive home, and no one would ever know, and that would be fine. That would be a gift I could give her. But if she stood up in my dining room, in front of 30 relatives and 100 strangers, and said the thing, then I would let the room itself answer her. Not me. The room. The person who made that possible is named Theo, and I have to tell you about Theo. Because every plan needs one person who understands it without needing it explained. And Theo is mine. Theo is my general manager and my maitre d', and has been my right hand since the second year of Juniper. He came up the same hard way I did, on the floor instead of in the kitchen. And he reads a dining room the way I read a stove. He can feel a table going wrong from across the room and fix it before anyone notices it was ever bent. He is unfailingly warm and completely unbluffable, and he loves Juniper almost as much as I do, which is saying something. And he has met my family exactly enough times on their oblivious visits over the years to have formed his own quiet opinion, which he has never once said out loud, because that isn't his job. I called Theo into my office the week before the dinner, and I told him the whole thing. Whose party it was, who my mother was, what she was like. He listened without a flicker, the way he listens to a guest describe an allergy, taking it seriously, filing it away. And when I was done, he asked exactly one question, which is the question that told me he understood completely. "How do you want us to play it?" he said. "Do you want them to know who you are? Or do you want them to find out?" "I don't want anyone to tell them anything," I said. "I want you to run the night exactly the way you'd run it for any 30 top who booked the alcove for a milestone. Perfect. Warm. Genuine. Treat me like a guest at that table, because I am one. And if my mother is gracious all night, then nothing happens, and we comp it quietly at the end. And that's the end of it. And if she isn't gracious," Theo said, "then we still don't do anything," I said. "We just don't hide anything either. If it comes up naturally, if the staff does the thing the staff naturally does, we let it. That's all. I'm not going to manufacture a moment, Theo. I just don't want us to pretend to be strangers to me in my own house. If the truth wants to walk into that room on its own, we hold the door. We don't push it, and we don't slam it shut. We just hold the door." Theo nodded slowly, and a very small smile touched the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile a professional allows himself maybe twice a year. "Understood, chef," he said. "We'll run it straight." And that was the whole conspiracy. No scheme, no trap with a tripwire. Just a room full of people who knew the truth and had been asked simply not to lie about it. That's the thing I want you to understand before we get to the dinner. I didn't set my mother up. I just stopped protecting her from reality. For 38 years, I'd stood between Diane and the consequences of what she was. Paying the bills, scraping the plates, swallowing the lines. All I did that night was step aside and let her walk into the wall I'd spent 11 years building. The one she'd insisted wasn't there. The night of the dinner, I got there before they did. Of course I did. It's my restaurant. I'm always there. I went over the floor with Theo, tasted through the kitchen, did everything I do every Saturday. And then I took off my chef's coat and put on a plain dark dress. And I went and sat down at the end of the long table in the alcove and waited for my family to arrive at my house and not know it. They came in a wave, the way my family does, loud and bright. My mother, in her blue dress, sweeping in like the room had been built for her, which, I'll admit, gave me something I don't have a clean word for. Watching her admire the room I'd made while having no idea I'd made it. Bridget was already filming as she walked in, narrating to her phone. You guys, this place, I literally pulled so many strings. You cannot get in here. My father came last, quiet, holding my mother's coat. And there were the cousins and the aunts and an uncle and a couple of my mother's friends, 30 of them. And they found their places. And somebody put me at the end, and nobody questioned it, because that's where I go. And almost immediately, before a single plate came out, my mother began to do the thing she does. And it was worse than usual. Because she had an audience and a milestone and a glass of champagne. She started with the sommelier. We have a sommelier named Daniela, who is genuinely one of the best in the city, who has forgotten more about wine than most people will ever know. And my mother, wanting the table to see that she was a woman of standards, waved Daniela over and made a performance of the wine list, frowning at it, and then said loud enough for the next table, I'll be honest, I don't recognize most of these. Do you have anything, anything actually good? Something a person would have heard of? And Daniela, who is a professional, smiled and guided her gently toward a beautiful bottle. And my mother cut her off halfway through the description and said, Fine, we'll try it. I'm sure it's adequate, and waved her away like a waiter at a chain. I watched Daniela walk back to her station with her spine very straight, and I caught her eye, just for a second, and gave her the smallest shake of my head. Let it go. She let it go. Then the food started, and it was, if I do say so, extraordinary, because my kitchen does not have an off night, and for a while, it was almost fine. But my mother cannot let a beautiful thing simply be beautiful without finding the flaw, because finding the flaw is how she stays above it. When the fish course came, a dish that takes a cook 2 years to learn to execute, she took 2 bites, set down her fork, and announced to the table, It's a little undercooked for me. They do that now, the fancy places. Call it delicate. In my day, we called it raw. A few relatives laughed, uncertain. And then she did the thing that made my hands go very still in my lap. She lifted one finger, summoned the server, and sent the plate back. Tell the kitchen I'd like mine cooked through. Properly. In my own dining room, she sent back a perfect plate of my own food to prove she had standards. And the server, bless him, he's 19, glanced toward the front, and Theo gave the tiniest nod. And my kitchen, who all knew whose mother this was, cooked that beautiful fish into a hockey puck, exactly as asked, and sent it back without a word, because the guest is always right, even when the guest is wrong in the owner's own house. And my mother took one bite of the ruined fish and said, There, that's better. You just have to know how to ask. And Bridget, the whole time, narrated me to the relatives like a tour guide at a sad exhibit. Marin's in the food world too, sort of, she told an aunt, with a little laugh, loud enough for me to hear. Like the cooking side? She's got a little spot somewhere. It's cute. Honestly, I don't know how she does it. It sounds exhausting. All those hours for, you know. And she made a small gesture, fingers rubbing together, the universal sign for not much money. And the aunt nodded sympathetically and looked down the table at me, the way you look at someone who's chosen a hard, unglamorous life out of some stubbornness you can't quite respect. And at one point, my mother leaned toward her friend, not quite quietly enough, and said the thing I think I'll remember longest from before the toast. She tipped her head toward me and she stage whispered, "We always make sure to bring Marin along to these things." She doesn't have much going on, the poor thing. No husband, no family of her own, just the work. It would be cruel to leave her out, the poor thing. A charity case at her own restaurant, though she'd never know it, invited along so she wouldn't feel forgotten. I sat there and held that cold, clear stillness. And I want you to know, it took everything I had. There were a dozen moments I could have ended it with one sentence. Daniela's straight spine, the ruined fish, the fingers rubbing together, the poor thing. Any one of them. And I let every one pass. And I waited. Because I'd decided I would only let the room answer if my mother said the whole thing. Out loud, on her feet. On purpose. And I had a feeling, the way you feel a pot about to boil over, that she was going to. She did. Right at the end, with the table warm and the whole dining room warm around us, she tapped her glass with her nail, and she stood. And she gave the toast you already heard at the start. The praise for Bridget, the soft, cruel turn to me, and then the line itself, landing into the room exactly the way it had been building toward all night. "Some of us build lives, sweetheart," she said. "And some of us, well, some of us never quite built anything at all. But we love you anyway." And the laughter rolled, and Bridget's red dot was on me, and my mother stood there glowing in the attention. 60 years old and certain, in the middle of everything I had ever made. And the night's own machinery began to turn. Because here is the thing about a milestone birthday at a restaurant like mine. The kitchen sends out something special. We always do. A plated dessert, a candle, a little written message on the house. Because that's hospitality. That's the whole point of the work. And Theo had timed it, the way a great maitre d' times everything, to land right about now. So just as the laughter from my mother's toast was fading, a server came out carrying a beautiful plate, a birthday course. A small, flawless thing the pastry kitchen had made, with a single candle and a thin chocolate band across it that read, in my pastry chef's perfect hand, "Happy birthday." And the server set it down in front of my mother and said the line that every server at Juniper says when they bring out the birthday course. The completely ordinary, true line, "Happy birthday from all of us." This is with the owner's compliments. With the owner's compliments. And my mother loved that. This was the night working exactly the way she wanted it to. The hardest restaurant in the city, and the owner himself sending over a birthday course for her? She put her hand to her chest. She beamed around the table. This was status. This was arrival. This was the whole point of booking the impossible table. And she did the thing that grand people do. The thing she could not resist doing with the whole table watching. She turned to the server, and she said, warmly, performing every ounce of her graciousness for the room, "Oh, how lovely. You must let me thank the owner personally. Is he here tonight?" I'd so love to tell him what a beautiful room he's built. What a beautiful room. She wanted to thank him for it. And the server, 19 years old, perfectly trained, who knew exactly who the owner was, did not answer, because he didn't have to. He just looked the way they'd all naturally look, toward the front of the room, toward the maitre d'. And Theo, standing at his station, met my mother's eyes and gave her a small, warm, professional smile. And then he turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and looked down the length of the long table, all the way to the seat nobody had wanted to give me. He looked at me. And the thing about a room full of people is that they follow a gaze. They always do. 30 relatives, and the tables around us, they all watched Theo turn, and they all followed his eyes down the table, and they landed on me. The quiet daughter at the end, the poor thing with no family of her own, the one who never built anything. The room understood before my mother did. I watched it move across their faces, this slow, cold comprehension, cousin to cousin. And I watched my mother's smile begin to falter as she realized everyone was looking the wrong way, looking at me, and didn't know why. So I stood up. Not fast, not to shout. I just stood down at my end of the room, and the last of the laughter died completely. And the dining room went so quiet, I could hear the kitchen behind the doors. "Hi, Mom," I said, and my voice was steady. And that steadiness surprised even me. "Happy birthday." "Marin," she said, confused now, a little laugh in it. "Sit down. What are you—" "It's my room," I said. The words went out into the silence very simply. I wasn't even loud. "This is my restaurant," I said. "Juniper. I own it. I built it." "The owner whose compliments just came to your table? That's me. I'm the owner." I looked at her, and I felt no triumph, which surprised me too. I just felt the truth finally standing up in the room with us. "You're sitting in the thing I never built. You've been sitting in it all night." Nobody moved. 30 relatives, a room full of strangers at the other tables, my sister's phone still half raised with its little red dot, and not one person made a sound. My mother stood there, with her hand still at her chest, her mouth slightly open, and I watched something happen to her face that I had been waiting 38 years to see, and took absolutely no pleasure in. I watched her believe me. Not argue, not laugh it off. Believe me. Because the proof wasn't a document she could wave away, or a claim she could spin. The proof was the room. The proof was the way every server had moved all night. The proof was Theo, who had turned to me. The proof was 19 years of a daughter she'd called useless, standing in a restaurant that did not have a single hair out of place, and saying calmly, "This is mine." You can argue with a person. You cannot argue with a room that has just silently told you the truth. And here is the moment everything in this story turned on. The choice I'd made weeks before in the cold calm of my office. And I want you to watch it closely because it's the whole point. I did not throw them out. I had every right to. It's my building. I could have stood there in that packed dining room and told my mother exactly what she was, line by line, year by year. The ruined fish, the catering company, the poor thing, the candle she gave my sister credit for. I could have made her small in front of everyone,
the way she just tried to make me small. There is a version of this night where I burned her down to the studs, and she had it coming, and the room would have let me. I didn't want it. That's the thing I learned, standing there. I'd thought I wanted it for years, and in the actual moment, with it right there in my hand, I found I didn't want it at all. Because making her small would have made me her. It would have made me a person who keeps the ledger, who waits years for the cruel moment to land it back twice as hard. And I am not that. I spent 11 years becoming something else. So instead, I turned to Theo, and I said, loud enough for the table to hear, in a completely even voice, my mother's dinner, the whole table, everyone, all of it, it's taken care of. It's on me. It's her birthday. And then I looked back at my mother, who was still standing, still stunned. And I said, and I meant it, which is the part she could not survive. I hope it was a beautiful birthday, Mom. Truly. The food was the best my kitchen makes. I made sure of it. And I picked up my water glass, the one I hadn't touched all night, and I lifted it an inch, the way she'd lifted hers, and I said, Happy 60th. And then I sat back down. You have to understand what that did, because it was so much worse for her than rage would have been. Rage she could have used. Rage would have made me the bitter daughter ruining her party, and she could have wept, and the relatives would have comforted her, and the story would have been, Marin made a scene. But I didn't make a scene. I gave her the most gracious thing one person can give another, her own birthday dinner, comped at the impossible table by the daughter she'd just humiliated. And I wished her a happy birthday, and I meant it. And there was nowhere for her to put that. There is no defense against grace. It just stands there, holding up a mirror, and everyone in the room can see both faces at once. The woman who said never built anything, and the woman who quietly built all of it, and then paid for her mother's birthday anyway. And Bridget had been filming the whole thing. That was the part that finished it. She had her phone up the entire time, recording what she thought was going to be a funny little clip of Mom roasting the boring sister, the kind of thing she posts. And instead, her camera had caught all of it. The toast, the never built anything, the room turning, me standing up. It's my room. And then the grace, the comp, the happy 60th. She'd filmed the whole reversal. She lowered the phone slowly, and I watched her understand what was on it. She documented her own mother's cruelty and her own sister's quiet decency in one continuous shot with her own hand. The weapon had turned around in midair. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. The room just slowly, awkwardly began to breathe again, and conversations restarted in low voices, and the birthday course sat melting in front of my mother, untouched, its single candle still burning. We did not have a big scene after that. There was no screaming match in the parking lot. My family is too well-mannered for that, which is part of the whole problem. But it served everyone that night. The dinner sort of dissolved. People made their excuses, gathered coats, hugged my mother with a new and careful softness, and filed out past the host stand. And several of them stopped on the way to say something quiet to me. An uncle squeezed my shoulder and said, "This is really something, what you've done here, Marin. Really something." A cousin, near tears, said, "I had no idea. None of us had any idea, which was the truest and saddest thing anyone said all night, because they could have known. They could have known any time in 11 years. They just never thought to look. I set one boundary, and I set it gently, and I said it to my mother directly at the door, while she was waiting for my father to bring the car around. I didn't do it to wound her. I did it because the whole night had taught me that I'd been the one holding the lie in place all those years, with my silence and my quiet checks, and I was done holding it. "Mom," I said, "I'm gonna be in this family. I'm not disappearing, but I'm done being the one nobody sees. I'm done paying for things and letting Bridget get the card. I'm done being brought along so I won't feel left out. I'm your daughter, and I built something real, and I'd like to be in this family as that person, the actual one, not the poor thing they seat by the kitchen." She didn't say anything. She couldn't yet, but she nodded once, very slightly, and got into the car. And that was enough to start with. And then, over the weeks that followed, 3 things happened, and they're the reason I can tell you this story without any bitterness in my voice. The first was my father. About 2 weeks after the dinner, Roger came to Juniper, alone, without telling anyone. He came in on a quiet Tuesday and asked if he could sit at the chef's counter, where you can see into the kitchen. And he ordered the tasting menu and ate the whole thing, slowly, watching me work the pass. And when the room had emptied, I came out and sat beside him. And my father, who has never in my life finished a hard sentence, looked at his hands a while and then said, "I watched you in there tonight. 2 hours. I watched the whole place move around you." He stopped. His eyes were wet, which I'd seen maybe twice ever. I should have said something. All those years, every time I never did. Not once, because it was easier to look at the wall. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I wasn't. I was just letting it happen to you. He turned and looked at me directly, which cost him something. "I'm sorry, Marin. You built all of this, and your mother and I called you nothing, and I sat there and let her, and I'm ashamed. I don't have any excuse. I just wanted to say it where you built it." It was the first real apology anyone in my family had ever given me, and it came at my own counter from the quietest man I know, and I'll keep it the rest of my life. The second was Bridget. It took her longer, almost 2 months, and it didn't come the way I'd have written it, but it came. She called me, finally, and for once, she wasn't bright and quick on the phone. She sounded small. She'd never posted the video, of course she hadn't, but she'd watched it, alone, more times than she wanted to admit. "I thought it was going to be funny," she said. "Mom roasting you." And I watched it back, and I saw what we'd been doing, what I'd been doing for years. I built a whole brand out of being the daughter who made it. And you actually made it. You built something real, with walls and a roof and 100 people inside it. And I called it cute. I called it a little spot. She went quiet a second. "I think I needed you to be the small one so I could be the big one. And our parents needed it too, and we all just agreed on it. And it cost you everything, and you never said a word. And then, I'm sorry. Not just for the dinner, for the whole thing. It wasn't perfect, and we're not suddenly close, and I don't want to oversell it. But it was real, and it was honest, And it's more than we ever had when we were pretending. And the third was my mother. And I'll be honest, because I promised I would be. She is the hardest and the least resolved. And that's the truth, and not a tidy ending. She did not show up at my counter and weep. That isn't who she is. And a story where she suddenly became a different woman would be a lie. What I got from her, about 3 months after the dinner, was a card. A birthday card, oddly, left over from some drawer, the printed greeting crossed out, and in her careful hand, just a few lines. Maren. I have been thinking about that night more than you know. I do not always say things right. I think I was harder on you because you never needed me, and that frightened me. Though that is no excuse for what I said. The restaurant is beautiful. You are very talented. I am working on the rest. Mom. That's all. It isn't an apology. Not really. It's the start of one. From a woman who has never finished one. Beautiful. Talented. 2 plain words about my work. In her own hand. And from Diane, after 60 years, that is practically a symphony. I'm not going to pretend it healed everything. But I keep the card next to my father's words, and I let it be what it is, a door opening an inch. From a person I'd stopped expecting anything from at all. Not everyone is redeemed equally. That's the realism of it. My father gave me the whole thing, all at once, at my counter. My sister gave me most of it, eventually, on the phone. And my mother gave me a few careful lines on the back of a crossed-out card. And is working on the rest. And may always be working on the rest. And that's all right. I'm not waiting on it anymore. That's the difference. I built a life I don't have to wait inside. That was a little over a year ago. Juniper is still the toughest reservation in town. I still get there before anyone else most mornings. And I want to tell you about that because it's the most concrete thing I own. And it's how I want to leave you. There's a key. An ordinary key. Brass, a little worn, to the front door of Juniper. Every morning, before the city is properly awake, I park around the back and I walk around to the front. And I put that key in the lock of the door with my restaurant's name painted on the glass, and I turn it and I let myself in. And I stand for a second in the empty dining room before the lights come up and the cooks arrive and the day begins. The chairs are down, the tables are set. The whole room is quiet and waiting, the way the kitchen goes quiet in the middle of a rush. And it is completely, provably, honestly mine. There's no last name on the door, and there doesn't need to be. I know whose it is. The 100 people who work there know whose it is. And now, finally, so does my family. My mother sat in that room on her 60th birthday and told 30 relatives I had never built anything. And she was wrong. And the proof was the very walls she said it inside, and the floor under her chair, and the plate in front of her, and the staff who turned, one by one, to look at me. She didn't need to take my word for it. She never did. She just had to stop for 1 second and see where she was standing. I want to say one last thing, and I want to say it straight to you, whoever you are, wherever in the world you're listening tonight. If you have ever been the one they couldn't see, the one whose work got called a hobby, whose wins got handed to someone else, who got seated by the kitchen door, in a room you were holding up the whole time, then I think you already know the loneliest part of this. It isn't being doubted. It's being doubted by people who love you so gently and so constantly that you start to do it too. You start to believe that the thing you built is small because the people who made you can't afford to see it big. Don't wait for them to see it. That's the whole lesson. And it took me 38 years and one terrible birthday dinner to learn it. Build the thing anyway. Build it brick by brick in the dark, while they call it a phase. Not to prove them wrong. I promise you, proving them wrong feels like almost nothing when it finally comes. I felt almost nothing. Build it to prove yourself right. Build it because it's yours. And because a real thing with real walls will be standing there long after the cruel words have faded, holding you up, with your name on the inside of every plate. Turn the key in your own door. You don't have to scream. You don't have to burn anyone down. You just have to stop pretending the room isn't yours. Thank you for staying with me, all the way to the end. If this story found you tonight, and you'd like to stay close for more like it, you can subscribe and settle in. Thank you for spending this time here with me. It genuinely means the world.